Coming up on Chasing the Natty, me and Jared will be discussing our top 12 wide receivers and tight ends, and we'll be discussing our mock drafts that we just did this past week and seeing how we did.
Look downfield, and circus, one-handed catch is made.
Jones goes to the end zone. Oh, what a catch! Devontae Smith, touchdown, Alabama.
Watch out for Mr. Robinson. This kid is going to be special and is already flashing.
This is Chasing the Natty, a college football fantasy podcast.
Welcome back to Chasing the Natty. I'm here along with my co-host Jared, and I am Xavier. Today we'll be discussing our mock drafts that we just did this past week. We had a 12-team mock draft with 16 rounds. We made some very interesting picks. I know Jared had his strategy. I had mine. Also, we will be discussing our top 12 wide receivers and tight ends to continue along with last episodes of our rankings of quarterbacks and running backs. So make sure you follow us on Spotify, Apple Music. Don't forget to leave reviews. Tell us how we're doing. Follow us on Twitter. Hit us up about questions you may ask. I know a lot of people are asking us for advice about some things about campus to Canton, some things about college fantasy football. We're learning as much as we can as we're going along, but we're always open and available for new information or any helpful advice we can. But without further ado, Jared, how are we doing today?
I'm doing good, Xavier. Just again, we're doing this back to back with the last show, and that one ran 2 hours, so we're back here ready to do it again. I have a great time discussing this kind of stuff with you. You said after we stopped recording, you're like, man, that didn't even feel like 2 hours. I agree 100%. Did not feel like 2 hours. I have a blast talking football with you all the time. But yeah, I agree with everything Xavier said. Make sure you follow us on all the platforms and everything. Hit us up with questions. Again, we're not C2C guys, but we're happy to help you guys find people in C2C drafts where if you get a little bit later into your drafts where you're like, all right, I need guys who are college producers but aren't going to the NFL likely. We'll help you guys out. Just let us know who's available and we'll direct you to. Like I had a guy ask me the other day where he's like who should I go with? It was like I think on the board was like Preston Hutchinson. And then he had like, who are some of the other people he had? It was like Preston Hutchinson, Tyler Shuck, and it was like Preston Hutchinson, Tyler Shuck, and I'm blanking on who the third guy was, but it was like a lower tier. I'm like, no, don't worry about them. Go Preston Hutchinson. Preston Hutchinson is going to be the guy that you're going to want to get out of those three. We are more than happy to help you guys kind of distinguish between you got a couple guys you really want. We'll tell you who to go for, who to wait on, kind of deal. So we have a great time. We love kind of thinking outside the box, like outside of CFF redraft. Like that's our main thing. But we always like the thought. We always like the thought experiment of like, what do we do in other leagues and stuff like that. I know Xavier and I just signed up for a dynasty league for this upcoming year. We're very excited to kind of play around with that, see how well we'll perform with that. So it's a good time. So Xavier, you want to continue on?
We also look at younger players as well too. We watched a lot of spring games. We like to watch the recruiting trail as well. So we kind of know, a few players that may be on some boards that may be shooting up in those campus to Canton or dynasty leagues as well too. But without further ado, today we will be starting off with our mock draft that we just did this past week with a couple of members in the community, college football fantasy community. Jared, if you have those names ready, I think we had.
Before we get to that, I'm just going to reiterate the two announcements I did on the last episode. No problem. I understand. I forget to do stuff all the time. So I'll go ahead and reiterate these two announcements real quick. Again, we're very excited to offer our very first product from Chasing the Natty, and that's the 2021 CFF ADP sheet for redraft leagues. It is being offered at $30, and if you want the 50% off discount, it is very easy to do so. All you need to do is make sure you prove that you have subscribed to our YouTube channel, and then you can do one of the other following two options. You can either follow us on Spotify and add us on Twitter. Again, show proof that you've done both of those things, Or you can just go to Apple Podcasts, leave a 5-star review for us. Let us know how you're enjoying the show and everything. We want to grow, and we only can grow when you guys are sharing us like that, or we can only grow when you guys are sharing us, talking about us, spreading the word around about this podcast. We've had a blast so far. We've been growing very well. We're very excited. The ADP sheet is well worth the money and well worth following us for in order to help you with your drafts this upcoming year. The other announcement I wanted to quickly reiterate, Mock Draft Monday, which is a service I'm going to start providing on Fantrax, where I will set up a league every week. Starting on Tuesdays, I'll put out the league link for people to sign up for the draft. And on Sunday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we will do a live draft. You'll have 45 seconds per pick. It'll be 16 rounds, 12-person leagues. And we are going to use that to build the ADP for the ADP sheet in order to make sure that that is the most accurate that we can make it. So with those two announcements out of the way, now we can get to this mock draft. I know Xavier's very excited to talk about this mock draft because I know for a fact he loves the team that he put together in this. So I'll let him start off. Wrong page. Where am I looking for?
Well, while Jared's doing that, I'll shout out some of the participants. We had John Lobb, CFF Insiders, Justice2318, Scott Bell, Brendan Hay, Chris Benzine, Kevin Brown, John McKinney, Yonker CFB, just to name a few, and me and Jared and myself as well were all a part of this draft. So it was a fun time. There were some interesting draft choices as we had some beginners in the CFF draft, some very
not even necessarily beginners, more just other people bringing in their thoughts and like who they value higher. It's nice.
Okay. Absolutely. And then we had some professionals down the line, and some people that had new draft strategies that had me thinking a little bit as well too. But for the most part, I stuck with what I wanted to do, and Jared did as well. So we had our own strategy going into this. Jared, I'll let you start off with your draft. If you want to name all your team in full, and then I'll go into mine.
Yeah, sounds good. I picked from the 4th spot. Again, this was randomly generated on Fantrax. I recreated it here in the Excel format. We did this on Fantrax. Again, same way we'll be doing with the Mock Draft Monday kind of stuff. And so I was picking from the 4th spot. It was randomly generated for me to be in the 4th spot. There I went Muhammad Ibrahim, which if you listen to the last podcast, I love the amount of volume I'll be getting out of him. And then I got wide receiver Khalil Shakir out of Boise State after that. Sam Howell out of North Carolina, quarterback. Wide receiver Jalen Cropper out of Fresno State. I got my boy, Demontre Tuggle out of Ohio, running back. For my second QB, I grabbed Preston Hutchinson out of Eastern Michigan. My third wide receiver was Travell Harris, Washington State. My flex was going to be running back Chris Smith out of Louisiana Lafayette. My starting tight end would be Jalen Weidermeyer out of Texas A&M. My first backup running back was George Halani out of Boise State, which I'll get to that in a second. My first backup wide receiver is Quentin Johnson out of TCU. And I followed that up with pairing him up with quarterback Max Duggan out of TCU. My second backup running back was Devontae Price out of Florida International. My kind of swing for the fences wide receiver pick I took in the 14th round was wide receiver LV Bunkley Shelton out of Arizona State. In the 15th round, I drafted Notre Dame's defense and special teams. And with my final pick, I took tight end Luke Ford out of Illinois. I mentioned him on a previous podcast. I do want to get his name out there. I want people to start paying attention to him. So that's my team. Xavier, if you want to run through your team now.
Yeah, so I was fortunate enough to pick from the 2nd spot. It was very interesting because usually I'm either the 1st, last, 4th, 6th, and 2nd was a little bit more challenging because you have so many options and you don't want to mess up. So contrary to my belief in my running back rankings, I actually went Breece Hall because I felt like he was my safest pick, but also still a really good pick. So I was like, well, we'll just go Breece Hall for now and see how everything else plays out with my with the 2nd pick. And then the 2nd round, I went Jalen Robinson out of UCF. 3rd round, I went Jalen Tolbert out of South Alabama. 4th round, I went QB Grayson McCall out of Coastal Carolina. 5th round, I went my boy running back Kevin Harris out of South Carolina. 6th round, I went Dorian Thompson-Robinson out of UCLA. Then I went my 3rd wide receiver, Chris Ottman-Bell out of Minnesota. Then in the 8th round, I went with tight end Greg Dulcich out of UCLA. The ninth round, I chose my backup running back, not flex just yet, running back Ty Chandler out of North Carolina. Then I went with my other backup wide receiver in the 10th round, Braylon Sanders. Then the 11th round, I picked up my flex of Xander Horvath out of Purdue. 12th round, I went Jaquarius Marks out of Mississippi State. The 13th round, I was lucky enough to get another one of my favorites, Jaden Daniels out of Arizona State. In the 14th round, I went and got Alabama's defense. The 15th, I went Dante DeMoss out of Maryland. And in the 16th round, I went Kenneth Walker, Michigan State.
Very, very nice. So I want to go through it. I want you to tell me what your favorite pick is and what your least favorite pick is. Like, which one were you not as sold on afterwards and everything? You felt you could have done better.
Yeah, so I will say my favorite pick would probably be...
let's say your favorite thing about your team and your least favorite thing about your team. How about that? That might be a bit better.
Oh, man. Okay. As I look at it, oh, man, it's hard because it's really broad. I love my running back and wide receiver room with the depth they both have. I think my starting running backs with Breece Hall is my number one and Kevin Harris is my number two. I know, a lot of people I know in the draft, a lot of other running backs that a lot of people had higher than Kevin Harris went off the board, but it was only by like a few. And I was like, I like my guy. And then with my wide receiver room, I know me and Jared, we disagreed about like Jalen Robinson and Jalen Tolbert. He thinks I should have switched the two. I was like, nah, I like Jalen Robinson with Dylan Gabriel. And then it's, Jalen Tolbert, even though he is going to be that number one with Quan Baker gone, I like where I got him as well too. Ottman Bell is a little bit of everybody's expecting him to be the number one. That's the news out of camp. So I'm happy to have 3 number one wide receivers. And then my 2 backups for Braylon Sanders and Dante Tomas, they could be either number 1 or number 2s. If they end up being number 1s, oh my God, I did super well.
I would agree.
If not, then they just won't. And their number 2s are still left in the waiver wire. So if this were a real draft and this were a real league, then if I were able to identify that early, then I could pick up those guys as well too. But I will say, if I had to pick one pick that I did not like the most, the Ottman Bell pick, even though I've been high on Ottman Bell a lot, it's just that now I'm starting to have that thing where when I found out that Rashad Bateman was going off to the draft, and I was like, all right, who's the next number 1 guy at Minnesota? It's just, it's hard to really like put a bunch of faith in that wide receiver, knowing that, hey, this is going to be your first time getting, most of that attention at that number 1 spot. I don't know, like I'm expecting you to do well, but maybe you won't compared to my other 2 receivers that it's Jalen Robinson and Jalen Tolbert. Like they're going to be good regardless. This is more of a little bit of somewhat of a wild card. But besides that, I would say Ty Chandler, because even though I like him, I've seen the film on him at Tennessee behind Eric Gray. I like what I saw and then what North Carolina did with their running back room, but it's still more to be seen. So that's mainly it. But I think I saw a lot of teams in our mock draft where I really liked more than mine's, but I feel like, if it got down to the league after weeks, I feel like I had one of the most balanced teams that we had in that draft.
No, I think it's very fair. Again, I'm looking at both of our teams, and I think we both drafted very good teams. I think either one of us going into the season at this point, I think we'd be setting ourselves up pretty well. In terms of my draft, my favorite thing that I liked about my draft would probably be the running back room in mine, easily. Muhammad Ibrahim, Devontae Tuggle as my 2 starting running backs. And again, I know I'm higher on Devontae Tuggle than almost everybody out there. But if he falls through, Chris Smith, George Alani, Devontae Price as my 3 guys behind him, I cannot see all of them failing. I cannot see all of them being busts for me. I think I have one of the most stacked running back rooms in this draft. In terms of something I felt like I could have done better, my starting wide receiver room, I love. Khalil Shakir, Jalen Cropper, and Travell Harris, I think probably might have been one of the best starting group of wide receivers in this draft. I'm not as happy with my backup wide receivers, though. Quentin Johnston, TCU, I like him. I do think he's going to be number 1 receiver at TCU, but how much value is the number 1 wide receiver at TCU? And then LV Bunkley Shelton out of Arizona State. If that hits and it's like a N'Keal Harry or Brandon Ayuk or something like that, perfect. I'll take it. But if he's like a Frank Darby was last year and everything, and it's going to be a very disappointing year. But also, you need players like that you're willing to cut. So LV would probably be one of those guys that, like, if he doesn't work out immediately, I'd be willing to cut. So now, Xavier, I'm going to ask you to look at my draft, and you find one thing you like and one thing you don't like.
Yeah. Let's see. I love the. I know I said this to you during the draft. I felt a little bit hurt because you sniped me because we were really close. He had the 4th pick, I had the 2nd pick. So when we had the turnaround and he picked before me in the, I believe that was the 8th round, and he got Chris Smith. I was eyeing Chris Smith as well, so I was a little bit hurt. So I was like, I really wanted Chris Smith because as I thought about it more, because I owned a little bit of Elijah Mitchell stock this past season. And I loved Elijah Mitchell. It was just really hard to where like Trey Ragas could go off or Elijah Mitchell, even though Elijah Mitchell was a little bit more consistent. But now that both of them are gone, that is a lot of carries vacated. And Lafayette is a decent enough program to where, I think Chris Smith can thrive in that offense. So,
my Chris Smith pick was your favorite one then?
I think that's everything else was pretty, I kind of expected. I thought I could get Travell Harris at a certain point. I thought he would go a little bit later, maybe back to me on another turn, but you got him up pretty quickly. So I was like, it's fine. It's okay. It still was a good pick. Everything else was really expected from me.
Okay. What's one thing then you think I should have done better then?
Better? Yeah. The wide receivers definitely. I know you. I feel like there were still some wide receivers available, like especially that at the end of our draft that I thought that I was predicting that I was like, oh, Jared's definitely going to go this because at one point we were both thinking about Charleston Rambo. And I thought you were going to go Charleston Rambo for your backup, and I was like, that would be pretty. I
thought about it, but again, like I inhibit myself a little bit with these mock drafts because I try to pick players I haven't picked before, unless it's somebody I just love, like Demontre Tuggle.
Yeah.
So I had already picked Charleston Rambo in another draft. So I try to avoid players I've already picked. Yeah. I probably would have gone in a real draft. Probably would have gone Charleston Rambo over LV Bunkley Shelton.
Yeah, there were still some other guys I like too over LV. Like I know we've seen a few videos of LV showing out at practice, and we're all expecting him to be that number one guy. But I think O'Keefe out of UCF was still on the board. Rakeem Jarrett was still good. Charleston Rambo. There were still some guys that were left at the end of our draft where I was like, maybe I would have taken them over some of the guys that maybe you would taken. Like even with Quentin Johnson, as number one receiver at TCU, which is good having number one receivers, but also when you kind of know what TCU's offense is, I'm like, what does that really mean?
Yeah, and again, I think that's very fair. Again, I kind of felt a little bit afterwards. I was like, I probably could have done better with my backup wide receivers.
Yeah.
Now, in terms of your draft.
Yeah, flip the roles now.
All right, so things I think you did very well. I think you nailed finding value. I think you nailed finding people who are falling and getting them for great values. Dorian Thompson Robinson usually is gone within the 4th round. You got him at the end of the 6th. I think that was a steal for you there. Another great pick, I think you got Jalen Tolbert in the 3rd round. I think with his ADP shooting up like it is right now, I think he's usually gone, or he's usually in that 2nd round run of wide receivers. He's usually gone there. I think you nailed getting him in the 3rd round, especially to balance out any uncertainty you might have with Jalen Robinson. Jaquavius Marks, my God, that was one you sniped me on. I picked up Max Duggan. I'm like, okay, if Jaquavius Marks makes it back to me on the next round, that's going to be fantastic for me. Nope, you got him 2 picks later, and I was like, great minds think alike. So I think you nailed getting great value. Jane Daniels, I know you're high on him, and for you to get him 13th round, a QB I know you're that high on. I think that was great for you. Now, in terms of what you could have done better, I'm going to go look at your tight end. I like Greg Dulcich a lot. We'll talk about him later this show. But I think the problem is you didn't pick a backup tight end. And I think the problem with that is that Greg Dulcich, while incredibly high upside, also has an incredibly low floor. I think it's very possible he could be a bust this upcoming year, considering I don't think it's possible for him to recreate Siri. No, please. I think it's very possible for him to regress in terms of the yards per catch because he only almost averaged. Again, we'll get into this later, but I think you should have taken another tight end later on. I know you had Darnell Washington on your mind. I know you had a couple other guys that you were kind of looking at, and it's like, okay, so that's probably the only thing I would have said is probably take the backup tight end. Like my team, I was like, if you're gonna take one tight end, take a guy like Jalen Weidermeyer, take a guy like Charlie Kohler, who's just proven production at this point. You know what they're gonna be. They may not be the highest, but you want a guy that is not bust proof, but is not gonna, for a fact, has a high chance of not busting. Does that make sense? Yep.
Yeah, I was just only like with Jalen Weidemeyer. I know a lot of people are still high on him this season because of like the touchdown machine that he was. It's just like yeah, he did that with Kellen Mond, and I know a lot of people have their own opinions about Kellen Mond, but Kellen Mond had a good season, and I will go out and say like I don't think it's like too crazy to say that Kellen Mond was a really good quarterback this past year in college football in general for what the season he had. So now you're going to Haynes King. I just want to see how that looks. Now I am one of those people that that have noticed like with young quarterbacks they kind of use tight ends as their safety net. So hopefully if that does happen, then Jalen Weidemeyer will be that proven guy that can make that catch, though, will run the routes and get the touchdown still.
No, I think that's fair.
But if Haynes King isn't that guy that can get to his tight end safety net or can do anything at all, then I think Jalen Weidermeyer's value falls. So, yeah, I definitely wanted to take a tight end in the last pick. I had Darnell and I had maybe 2 or 3 other guys that I can't think of off the top of my head. But the last pick was very interesting because I think I like what I'm hearing out of Kenneth Walker out of Michigan State. And I was like, look, Ty Chandler and Xander Horvath, they could be hit or miss. And we'll see how that works out. But if Kenneth Walker ends up, having the production that, a lot of people at Michigan State and the community thinks that he can have, being there, they haven't had a 1,000-yard rusher in a long time. If he can do that and also get the touchdowns that he had last season, I think I got a really good pick then. So I was like, I would be fine with streaming a tight end if it came down to it.
That's fair. And again, I think you have a couple guys there that you could cut. I think Xander Horvath is very cuttable. Dante Demas is very cuttable in my opinion. Braylon Sanders, turns out that he's not the number one wide receiver for whatever reason. He's very cuttable. Yeah. So I think you could work with that. Alrighty. You have any more thoughts on this draft or anything before we move on to the meat of the show?
Yeah, I think I will say this. It's going to be interesting to see, with our with your fantasy mock draft Mondays, to see if defenses like go a little bit higher or if they stay at the they go as late as they do. Because I remember I saw Clemson's defense go off the board like maybe the round before my pick, and I was like, okay, it's getting that.
I think he went 12th round, maybe.
12th round, okay. So I waited maybe 2 more because I said maybe I could either get Alabama if I could get lucky enough to wait 2 more picks. I can get Alabama's defense. Or
yes, it was the 12th round.
So I was like, yeah, I'll still like either I could wait on Alabama or I could still get Georgia. I just know I have to. At one point in time in this draft, I have to reach for a defense, which I didn't even feel like it was a reach. So.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, Alabama's defense that to me is the number one DST this upcoming year.
Yeah, so I was like, we'll see how this goes, but some people may have defense rated higher, higher up in maybe that like 10th round or 10th to 11th round pick. So we'll see as more mock drafts keep on going.
Sounds good. Any other final thoughts I might have? There was one person, I'll give him a shout out, Kevin Brown. Decided to kind of take a look and see what happens if you just punt on QB for as late as you can. He says he was happy with it. He ended up getting, I believe it was Brock Purdy and who was the other?
Delora out of Washington State.
Yeah, he got Brock Purdy and Jaden Delora as his 2 starting QBs, and I think he got him like rounds 13 or 14, if I remember correctly. Like he waited a long time before he grabbed QBs. He says he was happy with them. I'll be honest. I guess that strategy is not for me because I would not be happy with Brock Purdy and Jaden Delora as my 2 starting QBs. So, but like, again, to each his own. I thought it was interesting to see people try out new strategies, just see what it looks like. So,
yeah, I mean, it got really interesting to where like I thought he was going to take a quarterback a lot earlier, and I was like, he's still getting good value at his picks. I was like, he got really good running backs and wide receivers.
Oh yeah,
kept on going, and I was like. And I was kind of getting worried because I was like, man, he could end up like, honestly having the best draft if he would have gotten maybe like a Jaden Daniels and a Preston Hutchinson or a Caleb Ellaby. that were still available at the time. And I was like, he could still do this, but he chose not to. So that was the only discrepancy I had with his draft as well, too.
Yeah. And again, I think it's just interesting to see people try out different strategies in mock drafts. Like, that's the point of mock drafts. Play around with it. Start with a guy you typically wouldn't. Like, just see how it goes. One of the mock drafts I did recently, I typically don't go wide receiver first round, but Kayshon Boutte was there, and I was like, you know what? I'm starting off with Kayshon Boutte as my wide receiver or in the first round. See where I go with that. Turns out I didn't love my running back group afterwards because I started off with Ulysses Bentley, Tyler Goodson, and another one, like good running backs, but like I was missing that elite one is what I was looking for. So again, have fun with mock drafts. Try new stuff out. That's the whole point of them. So with all that said, we're 25 minutes in, so we're just going to go ahead and move on to the meat of the show. And we're going to go ahead and lay out each of our top 12 wide receivers for this upcoming year. So Xavier, I went first with the running backs last time, so we're going to go ahead and have you start the wide receivers. And you have at your number one wide receiver, David Bell, wide receiver out of Purdue, and I have him also at number one. So Xavier, I'll let you say your piece on Mr. David Bell.
Yeah, David Bell, I think that it's, 99.9%. Actually, maybe like not more like 98% of the community have David Bell as that number one receiver. There is another guy that we'll get on to really soon at that number two that's kind of pushing for that number one spot. But David Bell is replacing, essentially replacing Rondale Moore in his production at Purdue. Rondale Moore, as you all know, this past draft, he went to the Arizona Cardinals, got drafted in, I believe, like the second or fourth round. Second round. So the year before in 2019 had a great season, was looking like to be the best wide receiver in the nation. And then this upcoming season, I believe he opted out after a certain amount of games where he got injured and then just decided not to play anymore.
I think he opted out, came back in, and then opted out again, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, it was a very strange path, but understandable because, he was already projected to be that high. And David Bell just basically absorbed that role and became that number one wide receiver there. This past season, he had 53 receptions, 625 yards, and 8 touchdowns. But I know that doesn't sound like much, but this is considering that Purdue only played 5 games.
6 games.
6 games. Okay, yeah, 6 games. And all barring but 2 games, he had over 100 yards and had a touchdown in every game except for the one against Northwestern where he had 9 receptions for 78 yards. And it's going to be interesting to see who the quarterback for Purdue will be because, honestly, he can work with any of the quarterbacks.
I would say, to me, it doesn't matter who gets it.
Yeah, it doesn't matter who gets it, but honestly, I know there's a lot of people that have a preference. I'm on the Jack Plummer train of like, or is it Jake or Jack?
It's Jack.
Jack. Okay, I got it right this time. It's always hard, but yeah, Jack Plummer. I'm on his train. I hope that he gets that starting job back from who's the guy behind him? I always forget his name.
Adrian O'Connell.
So it's going to be an interesting battle at Purdue. Obviously, whoever wins that job, they're going to shoot up in ADP in rankings.
Yeah, no joke.
So, but David Bell, they have a nice number one receiver, and I think he's going to be that guy at Purdue.
In terms of my takes on David Bell, again, pretty much everything you said. He's going to be the number one receiver at Purdue. He's by far the most talented receiver on that roster, especially now that Rondale Moore is out of there. I have a question for you, Xavier, and this is more just a football rather than a fantasy question, but I see a lot of people mocking David Bell as a first-round wide receiver next year. That technically would mean that he's a more talented. The NFL views him as a more talented wide receiver than Rondale Moore. Would you agree with that assessment?
I will say this. He has the physical attributes of a first-round receiver more than Rondale Moore. Rondale Moore is very, very undersized, but he makes up for it in his physicality of like when he has pro day, he had like a 40-something inch vertical, was running like a 4.3. So like Rondale Moore proved that his height didn't matter. But David Bell, 6'2", I believe 205 pounds. That's in that like range of like what you want as a wide receiver. And if he's getting 100-yard games and multiple touchdowns, then yeah, I could see him as a number one, a first round pick. And I think that's a safe first round pick. It's just that maybe Rondale Moore probably has more talent. It's just that, his height is the only issue that would probably have concern of like what his success could be.
No, that's fair. So we'll go ahead and move on to our second wide receiver. We both have the same guy at number 2, and that's going to be Kayshon Boutte out of LSU. And so I'll go ahead and say my piece on this. Last year, Kayshon Boutte had 45 receptions for 735 yards and 5 touchdowns. Really didn't kind of catch on until the end of the year after Terrence Marshall Jr. opted out of the rest of the season. He was a 5-star freshman coming in. Kind of took some time to learn the offense, kind of establish his feet. But as soon as he did, easily is the best receiver on this team right now. I believe his last 3 or 4 games, he had over 100 yards in each of them, multiple touchdowns. And I was kind of among the people where it's like, okay, I need to see that continue. Like, I'm not going to let that 4-game sample size at the end of the year once Terrence Marshall was gone kind of dictate my opinion on it. But then he did it again in the spring game. He had 131 yards and and a touchdown in the spring game by halftime. And that doesn't even include like an 80-yard touchdown that was called back because of a holding penalty. So he had almost 200 yards and 2 touchdowns in the first half of the spring game. And I'm like, okay, if this is what we're going to get, he's clearly for a time, I was like, he might be the wide receiver 1. I've calmed down a little bit since then. But to me, he's in the same tier as David Bell. Like, these two are in their own tier. To me, really, these are the only 2 I would spend a 1st-round pick on. If they fell to the right position, in my opinion. That's pretty much what I have to say on it. Xavier, you have anything else on it?
Not really much to say. It's more of a, just crediting LSU about building a legacy of wide receivers. I know there's a lot of discussion about who wide receiver U is. LSU's definitely in that discussion of where they're producing Odell Beckham, Jarvis Landry, Jamar Chase, Terrence Marshall Jr. Those are just to name off a few. And if Kayshon Boutte is that next guy, then there's a lot of promise to be shown. And considering that he's going into his sophomore season, we're expecting a breakout season now. I know it's going to be a little bit different because he only, he played with Miles Brennan for just a few games, and then he had Max Johnson, which he really connected with. So it's going to be interesting to see who gets that starting job. I'm rooting for Max Johnson. I think after the Florida game, he proved that, hey, even though Miles Brennan is good, but I think I'm ready. I like Max Johnson coming out of Georgia, 6'5", has the build for it, has the arm, showed a lot of promise, and obviously has that connection with Kayshon. So I think that will speak even more to his value if Max Johnson is named that starting QB.
For some reason, my mind just did like a mental dyslexia thing where like I thought you said 5'6", not 6'5", and I was like, wait a minute, I had no idea that he was actually 6'5". That makes all the sense in the world. Yeah, I kind of agree with you. Doesn't really matter who wins that QB competition. I think Kayshon Boutte is going to be, incredible either way. Yeah. And I'll say it again. He's in the same tier as David Bell for me, and I think they're both going to be fantastic this year.
Yeah, I just like that familiarity with the guy that you were doing well with, and then also the guy that liked well with you. So yeah,
that is fair. So we'll go ahead and move on. This was my number 2 technically, so we're going to go to your number 3.
Yeah,
and so your number 3 is wide receiver out of Arkansas, Treylon Burks. So you have him at number 3. I have him at number 4. So you want to say your piece on this?
Yeah, Treylon Burks, a great wide receiver. I love his build. A sophomore out of Arkansas, 51 receptions, 820 yards, 7 touchdowns. And with the departure of Mike Woods, I just expect his value to just increase. That's why, I think I still had him at 3 even when Mike Woods was there. But now, Treylon Burks has that ability to where I don't think he will mainly step in that Kayshon Boutte or David Bell range yet. But that's all. I think it could possibly now. I think about it now. If KJ Jefferson is, that quarterback that, a lot of people are hoping that he will be, and he can get that, and if he can get the ball to Treylon Burks' hands, a decent amount of times, Treylon Burks Arkansas can be relevant in terms of having a nice quarterback and wide receiver duo. Mm-hmm. So that's why I had Treylon Burks there. I like his upside. I like this upcoming season with him being that clear number one guy. Where Mike Woods, even though he was that number 2, it was just like, yeah, Mike Woods is still going to be there, so maybe some targets will be taken away, but I don't see anybody else. And Traylon Burks, I believe, was like second in receptions or touchdowns among wide receivers in the SEC or something like that. So I like his value at 3. And I'll just ask you this: like, what did Traylon Burks do to you, Jared? Like, why can't he be that number 3 guy? That number 3 guy better be somebody spectacular for him, Traylon Burks, to be knocked down to a measly 4.
I will get to who I have at number 3 in a second. You have him at number 4, so you clearly view him kind of in the same tier. Yeah. But I like Traylon Burks a lot. I really, really do. And I'll be honest, like, I'm getting a soft spot for Arkansas a little bit. Like, I really like what they're building there right now. I think KJ Jefferson's going to be a good quarterback for them this upcoming year. I liked a lot what I saw in the spring game. Clearly good chemistry between Jefferson and Burks and also Woods at the time, but now Mike Woods is transferred to Oklahoma. Traylon Burks to me is the clear number 1. Trey Knox Trey Knox, I believe, is the other wide receiver there. I think could cause a little bit of noise, but also I think we've been waiting on him to cause a little noise for like 3 years now. But Traylon Burks, I do think he is in now this kind of second tier behind Kayshon Boutte and David Bell. I originally had him about a tier below. You'll see me kind of reference these tiers, but now to me, he's in this same tier as the 3, 4, and 5. Those to me are their own separate tiers. The second tier, but they are they're not bust proof, but to me, they're pretty freaking close. And I think Traylon Burks has the talent to be a first round wide receiver this next year. And I think he's absolutely going to dominate if KJ Jefferson is as good of a QB as we kind of expected him to be. Now, you're telling me that my number 3 wide receiver better blow your socks off. Well, my number 3 wide receiver is Khalil Shakir, wide receiver out of Boise State, and who you have at number 4. So it's not like I'm putting somebody too high. All right. Like the switch. Regardless, I'll tell you what the tiebreaker is, and it'll come from the stats here. So, Khalil Shakir, in limited games last year, because Mountain West started late, had 52 receptions, 719 yards receiving, 6 touchdowns. Those are both less than what Traylon Burks had, although Traylon Burks played more games regardless. The thing that differentiates them to me is the fact that Khalil Shakir's rushing game is far superior to that of Traylon Burks. Khalil Shakir had 17 rushes for 148 yards versus Traylon Burks, who had 15 rushes in more games for 75 yards. So while Khalil Shakir is averaging, let me do some calculation real quick. While Khalil Shakir is averaging 8.7 yards per carry, Traylon Burks had about 5 yards per carry, and also Khalil Shakir was getting more carries per game. So that's why I'm going to push Khalil Shakir as my number 3 wide receiver this upcoming year. And also, I've seen Khalil Shakir be like the only wide receiver on Boise State. I'm still not entirely sold that Traylon Burks will be, the gap between Traylon Burks and the next wide receiver on Arkansas will be as great as the one between Khalil Shakir and the next wide receiver at Boise State. I love both of these guys. Again, they're in the same exact tier for me. But the tiebreaker to me was the rushing ability for Khalil Shakir. So, yeah, that's pretty much my say on Khalil Shakir. Xavier, you have any thoughts there?
Now that you mentioned the rushing ability, you got me kind of regretting my rankings. I think maybe I knocked Khalil Shakir maybe a little bit too hard. Well, it's not that hard. We had them switched, but now I think I'm ready to. I think you've convinced me enough to where if I had to go back, I would pick Khalil Shakir at 3 and Traylon Burks at 4.
Nice, let's go.
Oh yeah,
all right.
Convincing flip that I'm ready to make.
Sounds good. So now I just did Khalil Shakir, so now we're going to move on to number 5. And so this is our number 5. We're both in agreement on who the number 5 wide receiver is. That's Calvin Austin, wide receiver out of Memphis. So Xavier, what's your thought process here?
Oh yeah, it is kind of sad because as a former Brady White owner and then seeing Calvin Austin play at Memphis, it was a great dynamic duo of having a QB and a wide receiver just being so connected to a way it was just like they were inseparable. Calvin Austin this past season, I thought I pulled it up, but
you need the stats. I got the stats.
Oh yeah, you can roll off the stats real quick. Actually, I have them now.
All right, cool. You go ahead then.
He had 63 receptions for over 1,053 yards and 11 touchdowns. He was averaging 16.7 yards per catch. The man is a great wide receiver. He honestly could be drafted next year in that like second or third round range. The only knock on him this upcoming year is how he'll adapt with Grant Gunnell coming in. And now I'm hearing okay things with Grant Gunnell, that he's kind of seemingly going to be that guy, because they have some freshmen. They have a freshman quarterback that's coming in that made a little bit of noise, but I think they're going to go with the safe option of Grant Gunnell. And Memphis is obviously a good team on the offensive side of the ball. Even though they did lose Taj Washington, they have another receiver with Ivory. But the gap between Calvin Austin and the next guys of Ivory and even Sean Dykes is just so great, because he's great in the return game. He's great in whatever position you put him in on the X, Y, or Z. It doesn't matter. He can do it. He runs great routes, and if he doesn't drop the ball that many times as well too. So I like him in that realm of, Traylon Burks and Khalil Shakir. It's just that this season I wish he had Brady White for one more season, but it's all good. I think he's just that great of a receiver where he can transcend, having maybe a lesser of a quarterback.
No, yeah, I agree with you almost so hard on Calvin Austin. Again, to me, this isn't where the tier ends for me. I do have one more receiver I do believe belongs in this upper tier, but Calvin Austin belongs in the same tier to me as Khalil Shakir and Traylon Burks. He doesn't have the rushing ability of either of those two, obviously, but he more than makes up for it in the amount of receptions that he gets, and just the amount of, he's such a dynamic deep threat. I love watching him play. He is one of 3 wide receivers today that we'll be talking about that received over 1,000 yards last year. And I think he'll more than make up for, or I think he'll more than do that again this upcoming year, especially with a full season of games. Again, the question really is Grant Gunnell as good as Brady White? Brady White was a good quarterback, but I don't think the offense ran that well because of him. And I think it's something more than enough that Grant Gunnell can put himself in a position to where he can run that offense well, and we can still see the production out of Calvin Austin and maybe even Javon Ivory as well. So, yeah. Calvin Austin, number 5, wide receiver. I think he's absolutely in that same tier. So we're going to go with my number 6 guy, who I believe is this last guy in this tier. Xavier, you have him a little bit lower. How dare you? But I'm going Jalen Tolbert, wide receiver out of University of Southern Alabama. Xavier, you have him down at wide receiver 8. I'm going to say my piece here. Jalen Tolbert belongs in the same category as Khalil Shakir, Traylon Burks, Calvin Austin, and Jalen Tolbert. I believe they are their own tier right there. And Jalen Tolbert's only recently moved up into this tier for me, and I'll tell you why. So last year, he had 64 receptions for 1,085 yards and 8 touchdowns, eerily similar to Calvin Austin's numbers. That was with Kawan Baker. The other, like, if Tolbert was 1A, Baker was 1B. Like, Baker was stealing a lot of targets and touchdowns away from Jalen Tolbert. But now, Kawan Baker moved on to the draft. Didn't get drafted, unfortunately, but regardless, he is no longer at Southern Alabama. So that leaves Jalen Tolbert all on his lonesome. And as far as I've been able to research, it doesn't sound like there's another wide receiver who's really kind of siphoning away those targets, especially now that Jake Bentley, former Utah and South Carolina quarterback, has now transferred over to Southern Alabama. Everything I'm hearing out of camp is that those two are in sync. Jalen Tolbert has great size, possible NFL wide receiver coming up this next year. I'm not going to say first, second round or anything like that. But he's a draftable wide receiver. He's got great size. I think he's going to have a monster year this upcoming year. I think that with a better quarterback than he's worked with in the past, like, not that Jake Bentley is like the greatest quarterback or anything like that, but he's definitely better than what Southern Alabama's had in the past couple of years. I really think Jalen Tolbert's going to have a monster year this year in terms of fantasy. And yeah, to me, it's him, and then there's a teardrop after this. I love Jalen Tolbert. I love what he has. So with all this, Xavier, why do you have him down at 8?
So when I originally made the rankings, I did not know that Quan Baker went off to the draft. I was thinking he was still there. So now that I've been enlightened about this information, then yeah, obviously I would like to have him at 6 because I even drafted in our mock draft as my in my third round wide receiver. Even though I know he's going to probably go a lot higher since he's that wide receiver 6, but I do maybe like one more guy over him than I had it. Like maybe like my number 6 wide receiver I like over Jalen Tolbert. But my number 7 I definitely.
Tolbert's actually going as the wide receiver 11 in ADP right now. Ooh. So to me, he's almost a steal at this point. Anyway, continue. Sorry.
Oh no, you're good. You're good. Yeah, I was like, I'd probably switch Tolbert maybe at like the 7 then 8. But like I like my 6 guy.
Alrighty. Well, speaking of your 6 guy, would you like to talk about your friend, Mr. Jalen Robinson, yes, who I believe I have outside my top 12?
Sacrilegious. Just
maybe.
Sacrilegious. We're talking about a guy that has one of the best quarterbacks in the entire nation. A man that the quarterback that's throwing
best fantasy quarterbacks.
I'd put him up there in one of those top guys in the nation. Like outside of the Power 5, Jalen Robinson.
Okay, I'll give you. He's one of the best Group of 5 quarterbacks.
Yeah,
I'll give you that.
One of the best Group of 5. I expect him to be NFL relevant in terms of the draft next season from what he's done for UCF at the time, even coming in after Mackenzie Milton. But that's neither here nor there. We already talked about our quarterbacks. Now to go on to receivers. We had a fantasy, basically gold mine at UCF with their wide receiver, Marlon Williams. He is no longer there. And his number 2 was Jalen Robinson. And Jalen Robinson last year with Marlon Williams had 55 receptions for 979 yards. So he was only 21 yards short of a 1,000-yard season with Marlon Williams on his team and had 6 touchdowns. And he averages 17.8 yards per catch. Now, his last 3 games were very uninspiring, well, except for his one of 5 receptions for 81 yards. But for his first 4 games, he had over 100 yards each game. It's that Marlon Williams was taking the touchdowns away from him. Like his first game against Georgia Tech, 6 receptions, 105 yards. Next game, 9 receptions, 150 yards. Third game, 3 receptions for 111 yards. 3 receptions for 111 yards. The man has the talent. And I think, between him, it's like it was Marlon Williams at like that tier 1A. It was like 1, and then Jalen Robinson was like 2, but creeping to be 1B. And now that Marlon Williams is gone, it's just Jalen Robinson alone and then everybody else. Like O'Keefe is good and Trey Nixon is good, but they're not Jalen Robinson. And Dylan Gabriel will, I think, notice Dylan Gabriel will obviously be in sync with Jalen Robinson, which he was at the beginning of the season. And obviously that now that Marlon Williams is gone, I think that Jalen Robinson's value should skyrocket to where he definitely deserves and absolutely should be in the top 12.
Well, with all that passion, how do I go up against that? Now, most of my reservations with Jalen Robinson mostly just comes from the Gus Malzahn hiring and my fear that the passing game for UCF is going to take a bit of a hit this year. And I have a feeling that he will, I agree with you, he will be the number 1 wide receiver at UCF this upcoming year. My problem is I don't know if he's going to get the opportunities that I want out of a number 1 wide receiver at UCF in order to make those scores, in order to make those 100-yard games that we so dearly desire. So that's mostly it. I understand why. Again, you're right. If Gus Malzahn utilizes the strengths of this team like he should, rather than trying to fit his square peg in a round hole onto this offense, Jalen Robinson is easily one of the best wide receivers in this upcoming year. However, I don't trust that to happen because I watched what happened with Gus Malzahn year after year where it's like, oh, I'm calling plays. No, I'm not calling plays. I'm not calling plays. I'm calling plays. regardless, his offense has sputtered out year after year, and I'm kind of afraid of the UCF offense taking a bit of a hit this year. So I'm off a little bit on Jalen Robinson. I believe, where do I have them ranked? I have Jalen Robinson as my wide receiver 13. So it's just outside my top 12. So it's not like I'm like hating on the guy. Mostly, again, as a talent, I like him a lot. It's just I don't expect him to produce this year as much as he produced last year, even with him being the second wide receiver last year. So that's my 2 cents on it. Again, everyone feel free to disagree with me. I'm just not there with Jalen Robinson. So, any more you want to say to me? Roast me a little bit further?
Yeah, I will say.
Oh, you took me up on that. You took me up on that.
Absolutely. I'll keep it short. I think, Gus Malzahn's been the SEC for I don't know how many years now, and now that he's moving down to FCS level, I believe FCS. Am I correct? Or UCF is?
They're still FBS. It's just Group of 5.
Group of 5. Going down to that level, I don't think look. I hope Gus Malzahn chooses if it ain't broke, don't fix it, because UCF.
I hope so too. I do too. I just don't trust him.
I'm gonna trust. I'm gonna trust him this season. The fact that he has the talent, and it's not honestly, yeah, I understand that over the years we've looked at his running backs and he utilizes when he had Kerryon Johnson, and then now he had Tank Bixby this last season, and even before that where he had Shivers and other running backs too. But I'm just like
Shivers.
Yeah, or Shivers.
Shivers.
Yeah, Shivers. But I just don't think UCF has the running backs that he's recruited yet that he likes. So I think he's going to have this year where he has to be like, all right, whatever's been working, Dylan Gabriel, you still have reins. It's just that maybe he'll be more of like, all right, I'll be able to manage this game with play clock defense. But besides all that, it's just let the players play. Don't try to force that, square piece in the rectangular hole, or I forgot the saying, but it doesn't matter. Same thing. It's the same thing.
How do you grow up and not learn these sayings?
I don't know.
Regardless, I understand what you're saying. It's just I don't trust Gus Malzahn. So we'll go ahead and move on to my number 7 wide receiver here, who Xavier has outside of his top 12. I don't understand this one, Xavier. How do you not have Reggie Roberson in your top 12? Reggie Roberson is my number 7. What do you mean I know why? What do you mean I know why? No. In 4 games last year, this man had 22 catches, 474 yards, and 5 touchdowns in 4 games.
Okay, I know.
The man is the clear number 1 receiver on this team. And then he got hurt.
Yes, tell me the injury.
He tore his ACL. You know what? That happens. It happens.
It happens.
Reggie Roberson is still going to be a monster this upcoming year. He is going to be a monster.
Look, I hope Tanner Mordecai is that QB that could replace Shane Buechele, because Shane Buechele was a great quarterback.
I think he's going to be a better QB than Shane Buechele was.
I'm the same with you, but we only seen Tanner Mordecai play for, 1 game, and that was maybe half of the game. So we'll see what he does with the full season. I like Tanner Mordecai's talents. But you're telling me I have to choose a receiver who was great. I love Reggie Roberson. He was great
the year before too. Guess what? He didn't get hurt that year though.
He was a nightmare to go against. We had one of our friends have him, and I dreaded the day that I had to play Reggie Roberson. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh my God. And so now coming up with ACL injury, it just depends, because like we all say, we don't know how players are going to come back with ACL injuries. George Pickens just tore his ACL. I would love for George Pickens to come back and still be the George Pickens, but also I'm going to have that reserve to be maybe I'll just hold off and wait to see it. If Reggie Roberson comes back the same person he is, I will have my foot in my mouth.
Yeah, you will. You will.
I absolutely will. But I am allowed to have that reservation of look, they still have Danny Gray.
But outside the top 12?
Look, they still have.
You got him outside the top 20 as far as I could tell.
Oh, okay. Probably. I probably do. Yeah, I do. I absolutely do. I think there's more guys.
You're rude. You're rude. This man's going as wide receiver 8 right now in ADP, so clearly you're in the wrong.
A lot of people still like the upside of him, but because he has the build of being a great wide receiver, but it's just they still have Danny Gray and Rashee Rice. Tanner Mordecai still has weapons to where he doesn't have to rely and hope that Reggie Roberson is that guy. So It's just that it's the injury thing is just tough. It is tough. We've seen it where it works out, but we've also seen it where it hasn't worked out. So if he is what he is, then I will have my foot in my mouth. But I still will make sure I draft a good receivers to combat Reggie Roberson.
Well, you better wash your feet pretty well, because with the amount of foot that you're going to be tasting in your mouth, you better hope it tastes good.
I really don't want to be the person to be like, I told you so. I don't want to be that guy, because I'm hoping for the best for Reggie Roberson. But in the back of my mind, I will be like, this is why I didn't have him in my top 12.
Fair enough. But even so, I don't like to project injury, if that makes sense. Like that's just not me. I like to assume the best case scenario for these guys when I'm projecting.
That's why I don't include him in there until I see it. I just have the reservations and just be like, I'm not saying anything bad that he's going to have a terrible season, but I'm not saying he's going to have the greatest season of all time. So
fair enough. I mean, I don't think he's going to have the greatest season of all time either. That's why I have him at 7, not number 1.
Yeah.
All right. We'll get to somebody here at your number 7 who's, we both agree is a wide receiver 1, and that's John Mechie out of Alabama. So Xavier, I'll let you say your piece on John Mechie here.
Yeah, I think John Mechie's I think this is probably the safest wide receiver that we probably have, like, in our top 12. I honestly think so. I think he is the clear number 1 at Alabama, but it's not like he's just like, has the upside of the other guys, but also he doesn't have like the floor of all these other guys. Like some of these other guys, like, obviously the top 2 are kind of bust proof at this point, but there are other guys where it's like, we'll see. John Mechie, I think with Bryce Young in the Alabama offense, is just guaranteed to be. He's gonna be that wide receiver 1 for Alabama. I'm not ready to. I'm getting close to maybe saying that he will have over 1,000 yards, considering like what's gone, all the targets that've been vacated.
Xavier, I will guarantee he has over 1,000 yards. You want me to tell you why?
Oh, did he have close to 1,000 yards this past season? I'm not looking
at this past season, like behind Jalen Waddle, behind Devontae Smith. He had 55 receptions for 916 yards and 6 touchdowns.
Yeah.
I can almost guarantee you he will have over 1,000 yards if he is truly the number 1 wide receiver at Alabama. That is there are 3 things in life that are guaranteed: death, taxes, and Bama wide receiver number 1's getting over 1,000 yards.
Yeah. So it definitely, I feel like it's a safe option for him. It's not like he's the most spectacular, flashy guy in the world. Well, I will say this: he did have the hit of the year this past year against I believe it was Florida. No, it wasn't.
Yeah, it was against Florida in the SEC championship game. It was I forget which cornerback it was, but
he knocked daylights out of him and got the ball back. And I was like, oh my God, that is a grown man hit. I know this doesn't show up on the stat sheet or fantasy wise, but I want him on my feet. I want him on my team.
Oh, so, yeah.
I love John Mechie. I feel like it's a surefire bet of like, you'll know what you get out of John Mechie.
Yeah, I pretty much said my piece already with John Mechie. Again, the big thing was, again, as the 3rd wide receiver, he had almost 1,000 yards already last year.
Yeah, it was kind of like wide receiver 2 after Waddle.
Yeah, I would say, like, unfortunately with Waddle injury and everything, like, yeah, you'd probably say like 1A, 1B, or 2A, 2B with Waddle because of how injured Waddle got. But even still, yeah, that's pretty much my piece. I said it already. Bama wide receiver number 1, Bryce Young, talented quarterback. I love that combination. Again, not a bust-proof product by any means necessary. That's why I have him at number 8, not number 1 or anything like that.
I think it's just more of like if you.
I said that, but then I'm like, yeah, you know what? If he gets over 1,000 yards, can you even say he's remotely a bust?
Yeah, I was like, it's just more of like if you're expecting, a 1,500-yard season, you hold your horses maybe a little bit.
Mm-hmm. But I don't think anybody's expecting that. I do think everybody's expecting him to be the wide receiver 1 at Bama, and all the gloriousness that comes with that.
Yeah, that's why I have him safest pick you can make at wide receiver.
Yeah. So we'll go ahead and move on to our number 9s. We're actually we are on the same page as this one. We are going Marvin Mims, wide receiver out of Oklahoma. Now, typically, I would say the number 1 wide receiver at Oklahoma is deserving of the number 1 or number 2 spot on the number 1, number 2 spot for fantasy wide receivers in the upcoming year. However, I have to pump the brakes a little bit on Marvin Mims because a lot of his production, a lot of his fantasy value, touchdown dependent. He had 9 touchdowns last year, but he only had, hold on, I lost. Yeah, he only had 37 receptions for 610 yards. Compared to some of these other guys who played full seasons and everything, not quite the production you were expecting, but again, those 9 touchdowns helped so much.
Oh yeah.
So,
well, that's
but also he was a freshman, and so he had to develop as the year went along. And clearly, he and Spencer Rattler have gotten some kind of connection together, and I like what I see out of that. That's why I still have him a top 12 wide receiver. But I'm gonna wait on him just a little bit longer than some of the rest of these guys that I normally would in Oklahoma number 1 wide receiver. So that's my piece on it. Xavier, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, we were basically in sync. I was like, look, yeah, I understand he very much was touchdown dependent. The Oklahoma offense last year was very frustrating for a person that, picked up Theo Weiss and had Charleston Rambo, and then to find out that Marvin Mims is just the guy. And I'm just like, well, what was I supposed to do? Mm-hmm. But regardless of all that, he was a freshman. The receptions will definitely go up. But I knocked him down for the reasons of Mike Woods transferring in and also the freshman Mario Williams, what I saw in the spring game. The 5-star coming in, a lot of good things, a lot of good buzz coming around, and I think he's going to live up to the hype that he has. So Spencer Rattler has a lot of options. I'm hoping that Marvin Mims is the number 1. I have the faith that Marvin Mims will be the number 1, but that's why I dropped him down because I know, if you'd have asked me probably like back in January, Marvin Mims would have probably been a top 3 or 4 wide receiver for me.
Mm.
So, yeah, that's basically my spiel on it.
That's pretty. Yeah, I think we're 100% in sync on this one.
Oh yeah, I'm ready for my number 10.
You're ready for your number 10? Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there. So we'll go ahead with your number 10, Mr. Jakiri Roberson. I misspelled his name. Oh my God, that is awful. But Jakiri Roberson, wide receiver out of Wake Forest. Xavier, what are your thoughts here? I have him outside my top 12.
Yeah, and I think I understand that we talked off camera about this and off microphone. Jakiri Roberson has, he came on a little bit late, but I think he is a great wide receiver for Wake Forest. Trying to get his stats up, but you spelled his name wrong, and also I'm spelling his name wrong.
Yeah, I got it. He had 62 receptions for 926 yards and 8 touchdowns.
Yeah, so he is. I would expect him to be a 1,000-yard receiver this next year. A lot of people were expecting that. I was one of those people, and I know Jared. We were both one of these people where we thought Donovan Green might have been that guy, which he showed up early and then kind of faded away. Sam Hartman's not the greatest quarterback, but for Sam Hartman not being the greatest and you still having close to 1,000 yards and 8 touchdowns, that's why I have you up there, because his last 4 games, oh my God, it was just 130 yards, 167 yards, 138, 131. All those games he scored, either a touchdown or more. So it just gets me excited about the future. That's why I felt like it would have been a disservice to him if I didn't have him in the top 10. I was like, you're one of the top receivers in the ACC, probably one of the top receivers in the nation. You get your yards, you get your touchdowns. Donovan Green doesn't, live up to expectations, then obviously you're that guy.
No, I think that's fair. And again, I have him. I just looked at my rankings because I couldn't remember where I had him ranked. I have him ranked at 14. So again, like I'm not super low on him or anything like that. And you basically named all the reservations I have about it. Again, between him, Donovan Green, and Taylor Morin, I'm just scared about one of those other receivers kind of popping up, and especially Donovan Green, because we all expected him to be the guy last year. Maybe his development just took an extra year longer. He could be that guy. Sam Hartman not being the best quarterback in the world or anything like that, not exactly a fantasy producer. It's going to be tough for me to count on that week after week for Jakiri Roberson. So, but other than that, again, like I have him at 14. I'm not super down on him or anything like that, but there are reasons why I do have him outside the top 12. So, yeah, but I also understand your optimism about him as well. So I'll go ahead and move on to my number 10 guy, and that is Senor Jalen Cropper out of Fresno State. So, the thing I like about Jalen Cropper is he's probably the most talented guy on Fresno State's roster. He's a former 4-star wide receiver, transferred back home. I believe he was at Washington. I'd have to double check that, but y'all don't take my word on that. But no. I believe he stayed home. He was a 4-star wide receiver that was supposed to go to somewhere like Washington or Oregon, but decided to stay home at Fresno State. And he is clearly the most talented player on this roster. Last year, he had, let me find my notes real quick. He had 37 receptions for 520 yards and with 5 touchdowns. But again, that is only in 6 games. He also had 4 rushes for 27 yards. So you project that out to a full season. That's 74 receptions, 1,040 yards, 10 touchdowns. To me, more than enough to be a wide receiver 1 in fantasy. And yeah, I think he adds a dynamic to Fresno State outside of Ronnie Rivers in that rushing game. Jake Heiner is a great quarterback. I think he'll be able to get Jalen Cropper the ball. And so I think Jalen Cropper is more than worth your investment as a wide receiver 1 in fantasy this upcoming year.
Yeah, I think I don't even know if I had him in my top 12. I think I had some other guys that I was still high on, but I like Jalen Cropper as well. I think when he played, against some, better competition, he kind of struggled a little bit. I think that's just mainly a testament to Fresno State. So, but yeah, if it's a full season, I think he can be close to 1,000 yards, or he can possibly get 1,000 yards. And, he is that number 1 option with Jake Heiner. So I don't dislike the pick. It's just, I think I have some other guys as well. That I like a lot more. But actually, now that I'm looking at it, there's one guy that I might fade after today.
Mm-hmm.
But, yeah,
I think I know who it is, because I'm gonna roast you when I saw who you have here at number 11, who's actually up next.
Yeah.
So let's get to it. You have Mr. Romeo Doubs, wide receiver out of Nevada. So Xavier, why do you have Romeo Doubs in your top 12? Let me hear it.
Yeah,
because I don't.
I know that now. I had Romeo Doubs because I was like, he was 1,000-yard receiver, and he didn't play, all the games that he was. Well, actually, did they play all their games?
They played 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. They played 9 games.
9 games. So within those 9 games, his first 5 games, he had over 100 yards, multiple touchdown games. Him and Carson Strong were having that strong connection.
He was unstoppable those games. In one of my leagues, we dubbed him the bad man. Like, make the bad man stop.
Yeah, he's very, very, very talented. Him and Carson Strong obviously have that connection. But Nevada this upcoming season looks like an offensive juggernaut. And I'm kind of concerned about his production going a little bit down. I think he could still, if all things work out for him, he could still get over 1,000 yards. But with the addition of the transfer that's coming in, the 4-star transfer that's coming in, and also with Cole Turner being, we'll get into that, where his ranking is as tight ends go. But Romeo Doubs is a great wide receiver. I was looking at this before all the news came out, and now I look at it now, I'm like, yeah, maybe he could still be my top 15. But yeah, if you still get him, like, you're still going to be a happy person. He'll get you.
I don't know you will be, because again, like, with the emergence of Tony Horton, Elijah Cooks coming back, stuff like that, like, he might be fading back a little bit, because again, like, look at like you mentioned the first 5 games, but look at the last 4 games.
Oh yeah.
Hawaii, 1 reception for 10 yards. Fresno State, 7 receptions, 97 yards, 0 touchdowns. Not the worst game in the world, but 9 receptions, 75 yards, 0 touchdowns against San Jose. 5 receptions, 42 yards, 0 touchdowns against Tulane. That's not a fluke. He faded as the year went on. Like, I have to kind of take a look at that and be like, all right, we have to think that something's up here. And so I've actually bumped him down in my rankings recently. I had him at 14. I'm going to have him down more towards like 18. That's where I'm putting him at. So wide receiver 2, I still think he has the upside, but again, like, he might be the guy that, like, I might fade a little bit once it gets to that range and everything. I'm just like, I'd rather probably go with the safer guy than Romeo Doubs. Romeo Doubs is a very boomer bust prospect, in my opinion, this year. And you will know very, very quickly, in my opinion, whether or not he will be the wide receiver you drafted or not. So I've said my piece. Do you have anything else on it you want to say?
Yeah, I will say this. I was like, with Nevada, with the San Jose State game, yeah, you're playing tougher competition, and Carson Strong didn't look like, the greatest quarterback in the world. I will say the Tulane game kind of got me a little bit worried, but that was mainly because Toa Toa and Cole Turner went off, not because of Torrey Horton, but also with Elijah Cooks coming back, that is kind of concerning as well. But I think it's mainly because I feel like it's just some of those games where, either the running back or Cole Turner or the star of the show instead of like the wide receiver. So maybe it's not mainly because of the other receivers. So I think he could still be that number one guy.
Yeah, fair enough. And again, like if he is the number one guy on this very pass-heavy offense this upcoming year, he's going to be more than worth your pick.
Yeah.
So we'll go ahead and move on to my number 11 guy. I'm surprised. I know you're very high on this guy as well. I'm surprised he didn't make your top 12. But I'm going to go Zay Flowers, wide receiver out of Boston College. This is a man that has been popping up more and more on NFL radars, been popping up on C2C radars. He's been popping up on Devy radars. People are starting to take notice of this man. Very, very talented wide receiver, great size. Last year he had 56 receptions, 892 yards, 9 touchdowns. He had 11 rushes for 41 yards and a touchdown. Dude can produce at many, many different levels. The only problem is his consistency is a little off. That's the main thing right now. He isn't producing this game after game. He kind of has this kind of boom games, and then he kind of fades back just a little bit. Nothing too bad. That's why I have him here at 11. I think the connection between him and Phil Jerkovich is going to be phenomenal this year, and I think it's going to be more than worth where you draft him at. I've seen him fall as far as the 3rd round, 4th round. I'm like, if you're still getting a wide receiver 1 at that range, to me, it's more than worth it. I think Zay Flowers is absolutely being underdrafted so far this year, and I think people are going to very quickly realize why.
Yeah, I like Zay Flowers as well. Maybe not enough to put him in the top 12, mainly because of the inconsistency. Because I think I did pick him up last year off the waiver wire when he was kind of booming off, and then I started to see games fade, and I was like, maybe you're not ready just yet. So, but for what I'm hearing at camp, him and Phil Jerkovich are, in sync. They're doing well together. I expect a good season, but at the same time, I have to have the reserve that, there was once upon a time where nobody had Boston College being good. And I could look at that last season that they had being a COVID season, maybe being a fluke. And now I'm not saying that as a testament to Phil Jerkovich's talent level or Zay Flowers, but Boston College as a whole going against other competition, maybe at full strength and playing, games at correct times and all that, going against like Clemson. I think they play Missouri this year as well.
That'd be a good game.
Yeah, that'd definitely be a good game. So we could see, the upside of it, but also we could see the true Boston College and what everybody expected them to be.
Mm. Yeah, no, I definitely think that's fair. So with that, we'll go ahead and move on to your last wide receiver and my last wide receiver. At number 12, you have Chris Olave, wide receiver out of Ohio State. And for my number 12, I have Drake London, wide receiver out of USC. So I'll let you say your piece on Chris Olave, and then I'll say my piece on Drake London.
Yeah, Chris Olave, Ohio State wide receiver. Now, this is a little bit tougher because Ohio State is basically just loaded at wide receiver this year. But they didn't play all their games this season. And the man had 50 receptions for 729 yards and 7 touchdowns. And he played that's about 3, 6, 7 games, and that's including the national championship against Alabama. Mm-hmm. And each of those games, except for the national championship and then the game against Rutgers, he had over 100 yards and a touchdown, except for the Nebraska game. So I was like, Chris Olave, it's really tough because a lot of people are starting to like Garrett Wilson more, which I actually did too in the games, but I gave Chris Olave the respect that, he probably deserves as being that guy, the guy that's been doing it for much longer. Mm-hmm. So I was like, all right, I like Chris Olave. I know what I get you. I know what I get out of you. You average 14.6 yards per catch. So I like Chris Olave a lot. If you go Garrett Wilson or Chris Olave, you're
I have them right next to each other in my rankings. I have Olave. I have Olave at 15. I have Wilson at 16.
I have Wilson at 13, and I have Olave at 12.
Yep.
Yeah.
So we're of the same mind.
Yeah, I'm surprised about your Drake London pick. You're going to have to explain that one to me.
I will explain that one to you because I have said in the past, I don't trust this USC offense. I don't. I do trust Drake London, though. Drake London is an extremely talented wide receiver. I like what I saw out of him. He, as the number 3 wide receiver last year behind Tyler Vaughns and Amon-Ra St. Brown, he had 33 receptions for 502 yards and 3 touchdowns in 6 games. A lot of targets vacated because of Amon-Ra St. Brown. Tyler Vaughn's gone now. And I'm like, okay, Drake London, I saw the talent. I see you are that next guy. Show it to me. Spring game, he showed it to me. 137 yards and a touchdown in that game. I'm like, okay, if you're producing that for me every single game, or even a little less than that, more than worth a pick here. I think Drake London is the safest thing about this USC offense. I'm not drafting Keaton Slovis, though. But I do like Drake London in this offense, but I'm also not going and drafting Brew McCoy. I'm not drafting Taj Washington quite yet. I do like Taj Washington a lot, don't get me wrong. But to me, if you're going to take somebody from this USC offense, it has to be Drake London. It's the only one I'm willing to take right now. Keaton Slovis, if I can get him for the right price, sure. But Drake London is worth where he's going at ADP right now, in my opinion. So does that satisfy you, Xavier? Where are you?
Yeah,
you still ready to are you still fixing to roast me, or how are you feeling here?
We'll see what he does in terms of the touchdown department this season. With the vacancy of Amon-Ra and Tyler, he only had 3 touchdowns last season, so that's concerning. But I was like, you're averaging a lot per catch, so and you were really close to some he had like a 92 and a 97 yard game against UCLA and Washington State. So I was like, if Keaton Slovis can connect with Drake, then that's great. But Taj Washington and Brew McCoy, if they do emerge as like some, being dependent, if Keaton Slovis can depend on them as well too, then I could see some games where maybe the other one will take over and like it'll be like Amon and Tyler. So
could be, but also I just don't think Brew McCoy is a very good football player, and I also don't think it's mean, but like I've watched the tape, I just don't think he's very good. Taj Washington's the one I'm afraid of because I'm afraid of his deep threat ability, which if that's the case, that'll obviously take away massive targets away from Drake London. But other than that, I still think Drake London is worth the top 12 pick for wide receiver. So all that being said, let's go ahead and move on to tight ends.
Yep.
In typical years, tight end probably wouldn't care as much. However, it's pretty deep this year. But also, Xavier and I are in agreement, actually, not on the order of the ranking, but we agree on the top 11 tight ends. So we're actually going to hit these pretty quickly because we're already at an hour 17 minutes, and we're also just, but also there's just not as much to talk about with tight ends.
Really?
But we both agree, and I believe I get to go first on tight end. So I'm going to talk about Mr. Cole Turner out of Nevada. Xavier and I both agree this is top tight end this upcoming year. Mostly has to do with the fact that he is a part of this Nevada offense, and they clearly want to use him. So this past year, Cole Turner saw 49 receptions for 605 yards and 9 touchdowns. Probably the best per yard average out of a tight end over 40 receptions this past year, and by far the most amount of touchdowns for somebody over 40 receptions. So he's not super touchdown dependent. He has a ton of production with 605 yards. And as Xavier kind of mentioned, when Romeo Doubs kind of faded throughout the year, Cole Turner really stepped up and became kind of that number 1 target on that offense. So to me, Cole Turner is the best tight end this upcoming year in terms of fantasy. Xavier, do you have anything else here to add?
Not really. I think it's the consensus that Cole Turner is number 1. Carson Strong has a lot of weapons to work with, and Cole Turner is a big body. So I think, he probably won't get the same amount of yards he was getting in the past, but he'll definitely make up for it with goal line touchdowns.
I would say he's a massive red zone target.
So I guess we can move on to my second pick. I know me and Jared are kind of in disagreement about this. I know he's still in your top 12, but I have him at 2, and I think a lot of people do as well too. Greg Dulcich, UCLA.
And I have him at number 5.
Number 5, yeah.
Yeah, you disappointed me over there?
Oh, yeah. We absolutely are. I think Greg Dulcich with the UCLA offense. The UCLA offense is very interesting with you have a you have a mainly run-heavy quarterback, then you have a lot of options at running back with Zach Charbonnet and Britton Brown.
Mhm.
And then not really that many options at receiver except aside from Kyle Phillips. So that's why I like Greg Dulcich in the passing game at UCLA. And this past season, he had 26 receptions for 517 yards and 5 touchdowns. He's at 19.9 yards per catch. That's almost at 20 yards. I'm not going to lie, Judd. I was really close to saying a bad word there, but it's okay. We kept it family friendly over here. But yeah, he was really close to 20 yards per catch. And I can only see that his role increases now that they identified that he is a very great talent. I think he was a freshman this past season. I think he's a sophomore now. So I'm excited to see him with the future and DTR, not having to rely on his legs so much, even though I would like to see DTR get some red zone touchdowns with his leg ability. I like his tight end option.
So Xavier, Greg Dulcich averages per game 3 to 4 receptions versus somebody like Jalen Weidermeyer, who's looking at about almost 5 to 6. I just want to point that out to you.
That was with a good quarterback like Kellen Mond.
Fair enough, but also Charlie Kohler. He's looking at about 5 receptions per game. Cole Turner, he's looking at about 5-6 receptions per game. Like, I'm just saying, Greg Dulcich, all his production came out of 26 receptions last year in 7 games. And, excuse me, that was good for 517 yards and 5 touchdowns. However, I don't think his almost 20 yards per reception is going to be sustainable this upcoming year. And you already said it, DTR is a run-first quarterback. He is like you're going to see a lot more production out of him in terms of that running game rather than the passing game. And I don't think that Dulcich is worth a number 2 tight end right now because of the fact that you're just on an offense that doesn't pass around a lot. And they're going to probably go to wide receivers before they go to tight end more often than not. Now, Dulcich is talented. Don't get me wrong. I do think that Dulcich, with the proper ADP and the proper reading of your draft and everything, you can grab as your first tight end as a very, very high upside pick. My only thing after that is you have to, like I mentioned this to you when we were talking about our draft, you have to grab a second tight end. You have to grab somebody a little bit safer, as safe as tight ends can get.
I will say this, with all the doubts, he was only a freshman, so I think.
Is he really? I missed that.
Yeah, I think he's a sophomore this upcoming season, or either he's about to be a sophomore or junior. Hold on, nope, never mind. He
is a sophomore going to junior.
Yeah, sophomore going to junior. My bad.
No problem.
Yeah, I think this was probably like the first year that he was really allowed to do more because his freshman year, he didn't really see the field. Sophomore year, they weren't. They only played a few games.
So his freshman year, he had 8 receptions for 105 yards, which averaged about 13.1. I could see that. I could see him coming back down to that. That to me feels like a regression to the mean there, if that makes sense. To me, that's still a good tight end, especially if you're 26 receptions and you expand that out to a full season. I think he'll still be good.
I think, with what he showed this past season, I think it'll be hard to overlook with the offensive coordinator in the playbook to just more incorporate him more. Especially, I'm not expecting him to have 20 yards per catch, but if I can get him to have like 15 to 20 at that range, then I feel like I've gotten a good tight end, and I have a reliable quarterback that I know can get him the ball, or that's Charlie Kohler is a very interesting tight end, and we'll get more into him. But I think that Brock Purdy is not probably the greatest quarterback I want throwing him the ball. So yeah, that's fine.
And DTR is.
Yeah, you know what? I'll take DTR. He's slinging the ball. Getting about 300-400 yard games sometimes. So I'll take that over a Brock Purdy 200 yard or 100 and something yard game.
Fair enough, I guess. I guess we'll go ahead and move on to my number 2 guy. I would have loved to have transferred into Charlie Kohler there, but that's just not how the numbers are falling here. But we'll go number 2. My number 2, Jalen Weidermeyer out of Texas A&M. I know this is also one of your boys because you have him at number 3.
Yeah.
And to me, and I know a lot of people around the community agree with me, Weidemeyer is the best NFL tight end for this upcoming draft. I believe that he is going to be the guy that NFL teams are looking for, and there's a reason why. The offense, I believe the passing game this upcoming year is probably going to run through Jalen Weidemeyer. Dude gets a ton of targets per game. Dude is looking to become the passing game for this offense along with Ainias Smith, because Texas A&M is losing wide receivers like you wouldn't believe out of the transfer portal right now. I think he's going to get even more opportunities this year. He had 46 receptions for 506 yards last year and 6 touchdowns. Dude was absolutely somebody you would want on your team in order to get that production, because even the games that, if he didn't get a touchdown, he got you yards. If he didn't get you yards, he got you touchdowns. Like, he was, no matter what kind of week it was, you were happy by the end of it with just the amount of points you're getting out of Jalen Weidemeyer. He's going to get involved in the game somehow, and I think he's absolutely one of the safest picks you can make, and that's why I have him ahead of Greg Dulcich. So, what are your thoughts here, Xavier?
I agree with you. The only reserve is, like, I want the passing game to go through Jalen Weidemeyer. I really do, but I just don't trust Haynes King from what I've been hearing and seeing. I just, like, look, I know we've seen instances of, like, all right, we're having a season where we just lost a great quarterback, and now we have to go through, our backup. And if the backup is not that impressive, it could get really ugly, i.e., Stetson Bennett with Georgia, or not Stetson Bennett with Georgia, but we had Dwan Mathis with Georgia, and things did not look that great, even though we were hearing great things at a camp. And we were like, all right, the offense might not be as great as we once thought, but it would be fine. And then once we saw it out on the field, things did not click. So if Texas A&M goes a different route and has a different quarterback that they trust more and shows me more promise, then yeah, or if Haynes King, proves me wrong, then I'm back on the Jalen Weidemeyer train. But this upcoming season, I just don't know. I can see him more as, like, being, maybe improving his blocking and doing things like that. But, doing the same thing of catching touchdowns like he once was with Kellen Mond. I think Texas A&M might go into that run-heavy offensive, like Isaiah Spiller, A-Chain, even Ainias Smith, instead of just, like, passing the ball as much. It kind of is like a UCLA situation where you're just like, all right, you have DTR, you have Britton Brown, you have Zach Charbonnet. Are you really going to get targets like you think you are? Because it's not that impressive of, like, it's just a concern about, are you still going to get the same amount of targets with the quarterback you had the year before?
See, but I can name a wide receiver off of UCLA that I know is going to get targets this year. I don't know of any Texas wide receivers that I'm really certain are going to be that number 1, number 2 wide receiver on that team.
Well, I mean, we look at Ainias Smith, so it just
fair. I guess if you want to consider Ainias Smith a wide receiver.
Yeah, I mean, that's what it looks like this upcoming season, because you already have 2 good backs, so might as well.
Remember when I said there wasn't much to talk about with tight ends?
Yeah.
Regardless.
Stuff where we really don't have anything to talk about.
So we'll go ahead and move on to our number 4 guy. And it's number 4 for both of us. We both agree this is our number 4 tight end. That's Sean Dykes out of Memphis. Yeah. So I believe it is your turn to make your case for Sean Dykes here at number 4, Xavier.
Yeah.
And I'll just sit here and agree with you because I'm also having number 4.
Yeah. Sean Dykes, the main thing I can really say is he gets a lot of targets and he makes a lot of receptions. There's only been 2 games where he's gotten over 100 yards. There was another game he had like 85, but he is a touchdown machine. He's a red zone threat. He did well with Brady White. This past season, he had 47 receptions for 581 yards and 7 touchdowns. So that's great for a tight end. I love Sean Dykes. If you can get Sean Dykes, then you're going to be very happy with the there will be games where he'll maybe get like 23 yards, but he could get you like 2 touchdowns. So he makes up for it. Kind of like Jalen Weidemeyer, where at the end of the day, sometimes you'll be happy. Sometimes, I think you'll just be happy at the end of the day, honestly.
Mm-hmm. I owned it for several of my games last year, and it was frustrating because you got a taste of those first 2 weeks where you were getting double-digit points per game, and you're like, oh my god, this is gonna be great. This is how it's gonna be all year. And you kind of faded a little bit, but also he never completely crapped out on you to the point where you're like, all right, I have to drop him now and anything like that. I think he's gonna be one of the best tight ends this upcoming year. It'll be interesting to see how he and Grant Gunnell are in terms of their chemistry. I think that's going to be a huge determinant in terms of how the season goes for him. But other than that, again, you're right. Tons of targets, tons of touchdowns, tons of yards. I think he's by far. I'm not gonna say he's a safe pick, but I think he's safe in that we've seen him do it before, so we know he can do it again.
Yeah.
So we'll go ahead and move on from there. We're gonna go backwards a little bit to my number 3 because Xavier wanted to rank him so low. I'm joking. I'm gonna go Charlie Kolar here as my number 3. He is Xavier's number 5 tight end. To me, Charlie Kolar is the high floor, low ceiling tight end of really these top 12. I don't think you're going to see him get more than like 12 points in a week, like unless he has just a crazy game. But I don't think you're ever going to see him get lower than like 8. He is involved in every single game that he is in, and he is like the safest, and I repeat, the like safest tight end option out of this group. Last year he had 44 receptions, 591 yards, 7 touchdowns. He and Brock Purdy have been almost inseparable during their time together at Iowa State, and he pretty much, I believe he's been consistent year after year. He hasn't really grown, hasn't really regressed or anything like that. You know exactly what you're going to get out of Charlie Kolar this upcoming year, and if you just want a safe tight end that you can just count on a certain number of points per week, go Charlie Kolar. That's all right. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. It's where I think Charlie Kolar is safe. That's why I had him at 5. I feel like the other guys are just like so talented at what they do that they could, have a higher ceiling than Charlie Kolar. But I was like, yeah, I'd still put him in the top 5. I think, with Brock Purdy and him, you know what you're going to get. Outside of his freshman season, his sophomore and his junior year, he basically put up similar numbers. I don't expect him to go, like, if they do go up, then that's great, but I don't expect him to go up by much because that offense runs through Breece Hall, and Brock Purdy also has a Xavier Hutchinson as well, who he has great chemistry with too. So it's not like the sexiest pick in the world, but it's also like, you can't go wrong. Like you won't make a mistake if you go Charlie Kolar.
No, I think that's entirely fair. We'll go ahead and move on here to your number 6 tight end, and I believe my number 8 tight end. That is Isaiah Likely out of Coastal Carolina. So I'll let you kind of make the case for Mr. Likely here.
Yeah, Isaiah Likely, tight end out of Coastal Carolina. I like him a lot, especially with Grayson McCall. They had great chemistry this year. God, why is his data not coming up? That's super weird.
Here, you want me to give stats real quick, or you got it?
Give the stats real quick.
Last year, Mr. Likely had 30 receptions for 601 yards and 5 touchdowns. So that's good for approximately 20 yards per catch.
Yeah. So with the 30 receptions, I think him and Grayson McCall were doing they really outdid their expectations. I am concerned about like the amount of targets that he gets, because it looks like he averages about like 3 receptions to 5 a game. But when he's on, he's on. Like outside of the one game that they lost, I mean, even in that game, he had like 84 yards. There was just maybe like 2 games where he had like 1 reception, but there was one game where he had a reception for 72 yards, and that was his 1 touchdown for the day. So I think he's very talented at what he does. Gets a lot of yards per catch. 5 touchdowns is great for a tight end for the season, and 601 yards is nothing to scoff at. That's why I have him. And I think he is going into his senior year, so it'll be interesting to see if he improves, which he absolutely can. But with Grayson McCall and what Coastal Carolina is doing, they could bring in some more guys and diversify the offense to have maybe more wide receivers get involved, because he doesn't get that many targets anyway.
I think it's fair. My reservations on Isaiah Likely, why I have him at 8 rather than 6 where you have him, are the exact same reasons I'm lower on Greg Dulcich than you are. The amount of targets that he has per game is a little concerning. The fact that he had 20 yards per catch, I don't think is sustainable at all. He had the exact same amount of touchdowns as Greg Dulcich. Pretty much, it's almost like a carbon clone of each other. Pretty much the only reason why Greg Dulcich is higher for me is because he's on a Power 5 roster. Therefore, he's more likely to come in contact with a game where they are going to be able to use him better. Now, Isaiah Likely, again, Coastal Carolina schedule, that is soft. But, again, pretty much the exact same reasons I'm a little down on Greg Dulcich. I'd love to be proven wrong. Both of these guys are very talented, but I'm going to have them just a little bit lower. I'm going to raise up some of these a bit safer prospects, in my opinion, for the other ones. So speaking of those safer options, this might sound like an oxymoron. Like you're probably gonna not like me on this one, but for my number 6 tight end, I'm going Isaac Rex out of BYU. Now I'm hesitating on this one just a little bit because Isaiah Rex was the number 1 tight end this past year. Oh no, outside of Kyle Pitts. Isaac Rex was the number 1 tight end this past year. Dude had 12 touchdowns this past year with BYU. Was one of the best passing options on that team. Problem is, that team is now missing that quarterback that passed him the ball. The offensive coordinator that schemed him open in those opportunities. And add in the fact that he is heavily touchdown dependent. He had 12 touchdowns this past year. He doesn't if Zach Wilson, the offensive coordinator, was still there, he'd probably be tight end 1 for me, but he has to be bumped down a little bit. Now, new quarterback. Xavier, you kind of touched on this earlier with one of the other guys you were talking about. A new quarterback, safety net is a tight end. So I still believe that Isaac Rex, as a sophomore, he's a freshman this past year. As a sophomore, he is going to get more involved in the game than he was this past year. They're going to move the offense more through him, I believe, because Max Milne's gone. I believe it's
Gunnar Romney.
Gunnar Romney's still there at wide receiver, but even still, he's like, And I'm trying to think who else. Baylor Romney, I believe, is the projected starter for BYU this upcoming year, right?
Yeah, we don't have much information about BYU. They don't give us that much.
No, this is definitely one of the teams where I kind of wish they had a spring game or gave some more information about spring camp than they did. But regardless, I'm having Isaac Rex at number 6. Xavier, you had him at 8. So you basically, Isaiah Likely and Isaac Rex are switched for us.
Yeah, you're basically saying it was like the safer option. I do not view it as a safe option. I was like, yeah, you're a very touchdown dependent, and Zach, like watching some of his games, I was like, Zach Wilson put the ball in the right spot for you a lot of times where, his size definitely helps out a lot. But at the same time, I need to know how well your quarterback can do under those like situations. So it's just like that unknown of like, yeah, I know you can catch the ball, but can your quarterback throw you the ball?
Yeah, and again, that's fair. Again, I realized what I said, and then I realized who was up next, and I'm like, well, I'm going to look like a fool here. But I do believe in Isaac Rex. I believe in the talent, and I will put him there.
Yeah.
So we'll go ahead and move on to your number 7, who is Mr. Michael Mayer out of Notre Dame, who I have as my number 9.
Yeah, they call him Baby Gronk. He has the body type for it. It's very scary of what.
Isn't every big white tight end just Baby Gronk at this point? Is that what we do now?
Probably, but this man probably embodies it more than anybody. Like from the bravado I've seen on the film, like on the field for him, he just like exudes that energy of Gronk to where it just looks like, yeah, you're a college student, but also you're really big and also a tight end.
He was a 5-star.
Yeah. So this past season, 42 receptions for 450 yards and 2 touchdowns. And this is all while being a freshman on a top 4 team in the nation.
The second tight end on that team, too. The first one, if you remember, just got drafted to the Carolina Panthers, Charlie Trimble.
Yeah. So it's really weird. It's hard to get a good adjustment for the guy in terms of like, there's games where he'll get like 1 reception. There's other games where he'll get like 5. So it's a very big range, but they are losing a lot of receivers, or they're losing one main receiver that had a lot of their receptions and targets and yards and touchdowns. So there are a lot of things that will be vacated. So Michael Mayer is poised, and especially from the season that he had this past one, I can't imagine the offensive coordinator or the head coach not scheming up more plays for him in the red zone or just in general, because he's just that talented.
Yeah, no, I agree with you for the most part. And again, obviously very talented guy. Again, 5-star out of high school. Probably the best. He might be the best receiving threat on Notre Dame's team right now. I'm not gonna lie. Like when I look at Notre Dame's wide receiver room, I'm not exactly shaking in my boots or anything like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, he's just the next in a long line of Notre Dame tight ends, I believe, that are getting primed and ready for the NFL. I believe he's likely to be, again, if not the first, definitely the second receiving option for next year, especially if Jack Cohn is the starting quarterback for Notre Dame this upcoming year. I could totally see tons of checkdowns from him to Michael Mayer. The lack of touchdowns is somewhat concerning, but also, again, you likely saw Charlie Tremble go out there for the touchdowns, like along the goal line and everything. They wanted their more experienced tight end out there. So you probably see that kind of go up this next upcoming year. I like Michael Mayer where he's at, but I have him at 9. Not a huge difference to me between 6 and let's see, between 6 and 9, there's not a huge difference to me. So speaking of that range, I'm going to go ahead and talk about my number 7 tight end, who is also your number 9. So again, we have a little switch here. I have Will Mallory, tight end out of Miami, as my number 7, and you have him as your number 9. So Will Mallory as the second tight end on Miami's team last year, because you have Brevin Jordan being that number 1 tight end who was phenomenal for me several weeks. But Will Mallory had 22 receptions last year, 329 yards, and 4 touchdowns, again, as the tight end 2. So clearly, this guy's already getting work behind Brevin Jordan, and I can't see somebody kind of taking that behind him. I think he will be the clear number 1 tight end on this offense this upcoming year. Whether it's either Jake Garcia or Derek King passing him the ball, regardless, depending on how the ACL injury is going and everything, I think he's going to be phenomenal this year. And I think he will be a great tight end option for this year. So what are you thinking here, Xavier?
Yeah, I like Will Mallory as well. Going from tight end 2 to tight end 1, I'm excited to see what he does, but I just have a little bit of a reservation of with the Charleston Rambo coming in, transferring, and I was like, all right, that's a really good receiver coming in. Also, you have Mike Harley. You still have D Wiggins, some other guys too that are probably hungry for some targets as well. So I'm just I'm trying to just understand what Miami's role might be for him. I know they're probably going to still have him implemented, and some schemes for him to get open and get some touchdowns or receptions. But I was in terms of the past of Miami, they didn't have I would say this is probably the best year where Miami's probably the most balanced they've ever been in a while. So I'm just kind of concerned of all right, how's the tight end usually fit in this? Are they going to use him more as a blocker, or are they going to keep him in that Brevin Jordan role?
I mean, you're right. Regardless of who the Miami QB is going to be this year, I think they have better options at wide receiver than they did last year. As far as I can tell, at least the guys that have developed and the guys that have transferred in, like Rambo.
Yeah.
And so you're right. You could see less targets be going to the tight end. So I think that's definitely a fair reservation to have. We're kind of getting short on time here, so I'm going to go ahead and move you on to your number 10 tight end here, if that's all right. And that is Brant Kuth out of Utah, who I have as my tight end 11.
Oh, yeah. So Brant Kuth out of Utah, I think is just a reception machine. I think
not this past year, but
past year, but the why do things not want to come up today? Man, you think you could just use ESPN?
So last year, Brant Kuth had 25 receptions for 236 yards and 0 touchdowns. Yeah. Sorry.
I was like, man, ESPN, you just think you could just type in a name and they'll search it. And nope, we're just not going to do anything. But yeah, even this past year, it's nothing to scoff at. 6%, in his games, he had 4, 4, 8, 3, 6. I think that's about an average of 5 to 6 receptions a game, which is a lot. And then especially for a tight end, you're getting some targets like that. I think that holds value there. The touchdown thing was a little bit concerning, but it was the Pac-12 and their whole debacle about, oh, should we have a season or not, kind of threw things away of like, maybe having, hope for, production among these players and what they're going to do and what they're going to look like. So I definitely don't see him not just having any touchdowns, because in 2019, I believe he had 6. So, and he had 31 receptions for 572 yards. I can definitely see him repeating something close to that. Maybe not. It just depends on, who's Utah's quarterback going into this year?
Charlie Brewer, my dude.
Charlie Brewer. Actually, if Charlie Brewer can stay healthy, then that's not a bad option for Utah and throwing him the ball. So I like Brant Kuth a lot in terms of, especially if you're going for a league of like PPR. I think Brant Kuth is definitely one of those higher guys that you should look out for.
Yeah, I have almost nothing to add there. Again, I think you hit all the highlights of Brant Kuth and everything. Again, the touchdown's a little bit concerning, but also, again, like we said before, touchdowns are not predictable. So sometimes you will have a stretch of 5 games where you have 0 touchdowns. What matters at the end of the day is that he has opportunity, he has volumes, and 5 receptions per game, to me, is more than enough for you to say, all right, that's worth the risk of maybe him not getting a touchdown on any of those receptions.
Yeah.
So I'll go ahead and move on to my number 10, your number 11, and that's Cade Otton out of Washington. Not a ton to say here about Cade Otton. I've heard a lot of buzz that he is considered an NFL prospect. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that he's probably the best receiving option on Washington. He was the number 1 receiver this past year. And I do believe he's going to take over that role again. I believe Dylan Morris will stay the quarterback for Washington this upcoming year. I don't believe Sam Heward's going to take over just yet. So I believe they're going to be kind of running that offense through the running game, through the tight ends and everything. So again, Cade Otton, very safe pick in my opinion. We'll see plenty of receptions per game. And that's pretty much all I have to say. Again, we're kind of getting to the point with tight ends where it's just like, this is just a good guy to have.
Yeah, it's not like we can look at like, oh, are they getting them, enough? It's just a matter of like, are they getting touchdowns? Are they getting receptions?
Mm.
Yeah, why is everybody wanting to text me today? But yeah, it's just almost like everybody just wants to. It's just a matter of like, are you getting touchdowns? Are you getting receptions? Or are you one of those like top 5 guys that are doing both?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
yes.
It's not you can expect like, hey, this guy got 13 receptions today. Like if a tight end's doing that, like if we had like another,
you got a Kyle Pitts going on right there.
Yeah, then that's where it's just like, look, if you don't get Kyle Pitts, you messed up.
All right, so we'll go ahead and move on to our last 2 tight ends here. For my number 12, I have Darnell Washington out of Georgia, and you have Austin Stogner out of Oklahoma. So I'll say my piece on Darnell Washington. Everybody wants to focus on Reed Gilbert as the 5-star tight end that came out of that year, as well as Will Mallory. People somehow keep forgetting about Darnell Washington. 5-star tight end, went to Georgia. And I know Georgia has a bad reputation with using their tight ends in the past. Look no further than Isaac Nada. And so, but I do think that with the combination of Todd Monken as well as Darnell Washington's just innate talent, Georgia will be using him at the tight end position more. In the spring game, he had a touchdown and 84 yards, which is probably more than I've ever seen a tight end at UGA get. So I do believe he will be part of the game plan this upcoming year. He will be seen almost as a receiving role on this offense. So if you want a high upside guy, but unfortunately a low floor as well, Darnell Washington is your guy. So Xavier, you want to talk about Austin Stogner?
Yeah, I'll go with Austin Stogner. I feel like it's a little bit of a more safer pick with OU. I think he's going into his sophomore year, I believe. Yeah,
junior, I believe.
Junior. He was just a sophomore this past year. Yeah, he had 26 receptions for 422 yards and 3 touchdowns. I mean, OU is just loaded at everything. It's the fact that he's like, even still, like the tight end position at OU is still relevant in per se is just amazing to the fact that honestly they could just use him, like they could just recruit a tight end to block as an O lineman. But that Austin Stogner is still involved in the offense, and Lincoln Riley gets creative and finds ways to get these guys open. I think Austin Stogner is another safe pick there as well too.
I have one name and one name only that comes to mind with Austin Stogner that gives me pause on him and why I actually have Austin Stogner as my tight end 20.
Oh, man.
Yeah, I bumped down, but that's Jeremiah Hall. And that's mostly with the fact that I believe that Jeremiah Hall is the more talented tight end on Oklahoma's offense this upcoming year. And so I do believe that Austin Stogner may see a possible regression in his production and Jeremiah Hall kind of take over as the number one tight end on Oklahoma's offense. That's all I have to say on that. Did you have anything on Darnell that you want to say real quick since I got my piece on Austin?
I have one name that might cause concern for Darnell, and that's Brock Bowers. It's not that he's
a freshman.
Yeah, a freshman that it looks like a receiver. It's very scary how fast I saw this man run in the spring game and catch the ball at a high rate that he was, to where I'm just like, I think he's just too talented to keep off the field. And it's just going to – like, Georgia has a lot of just hidden gems that I'm just like, I don't know. Todd Monken's probably just having, like, a field day every day. He goes into work thinking, how do I get some of these guys the ball and see how much –
Hopefully.
I believe so. I'm a believer that, it's just too much talent to just go to waste.
Mm-hmm. Fair enough. Alrighty, so we're going to wrap up here. I'm going to go back to our wide receivers, list off what our top 12 wide receivers, top 12 tight ends. My God, I can't speak anymore. We've been doing this for too long. And list all that off real quick, and then we're going to wrap up the show. So for my top 12 wide receivers of the year, I have David Bell, Kayshon Boutte, Khalil Shakir, Treylon Burks, Calvin Austin, Jalen Tolbert, Reggie Roberson, John Mechie, Marvin Mims, Jalen Cropper, Zay Flowers, and Drake London. Xavier's top 12 of the year for wide receiver are David Bell, Kayshon Boutte, Treylon Burks, Khalil Shakir, Calvin Austin, Jalen Robinson, John Mechie, Jalen Tolbert, Marvin Mims, Shakiri Roberson, Romeo Doubs, and Chris Olave. For tight ends, my top 12 tight ends of the year are Cole Turner, Jalen Weidermeyer, Charlie Kohler, Sean Dykes, Greg Dulcich, Isaac Rex, Will Mallory, Isaiah Likely, Michael Mayer, Kate Otten, Brant Kuth, and Darnell Washington. Xavier's top 12 tight ends of the year are Cole Turner, Greg Dulcich, Jalen Weidermeyer, Sean Dykes, Charlie Kohler, Isaiah Likely, Michael Mayer, Isaac Rex, Will Mallory, Brant Kuth, Kate Otten, and Austin Stogner. So, with all that being said, again, these past two episodes have been really long ones, but again, I thought we had some great discussion with all of it. Please take your time to listen to them and everything. We appreciate you guys sticking around with all of this. Thank you guys for listening so much. We're growing every single episode. We cannot thank you guys enough. Please do not forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel. Follow us on Spotify. Follow us on Apple Podcasts. Make sure you write a review if you're enjoying the show. Follow us on Twitter. Add us. Ask us questions. We have no problem answering them. We love it when people kind of pick our brains. Doesn't even have to be CFF redraft. We just like fantasy questions in general. And other things, don't forget about the ADP sheet that is now on sale for $30. And if you want that 50% off discount, just follow the instructions I kind of mentioned earlier in this podcast and definitely in the past episode. Please participate in Mock Draft Mondays that we have coming up each week. The links for that will be out on Tuesdays, and you will have until, or basically it'll go until all the spots have been filled up, and then the draft will take place on Sunday night at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and the results of the draft will be released the following day. Thank you guys so much for watching. Xavier, do you have anything else you want to add before we head out?
No, not really. Like Jared said, thank you all for supporting us and listening to us just, ramble on. If you like what we have to say, leave us a review. Also, hit us up on Twitter. Ask us questions. If doesn't have to be fantasy, it could just be football in general. We love all from professional to college on every level. So, don't be afraid to reach out to us.
Mm-hmm. Again, we have a fantastic time doing this, y'all. And again, we can't wait for the next episode. We can't wait to keep growing. We'll see you guys next time. I'm Chasing the Natty.